Welcome back, everyone. And here we are at the final session of today's conference. Next up, we have our lightning talks, where we like to give a snapshot of case studies from across the environmental sector. And as it does move at lightning speed, I will not take up any more time, but I would like to reintroduce Jack Hatcher from our comms team, who's just going to be hosting this lightning talks session for us. And then our speakers as well. So thank you, Jack, for picking us.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you, Becca, for that quick introduction. So I'll be introducing the Lightning Talks case studies section. So we're just highlighting some case studies of how data and evidence have been used for environmental improvements. We do have to note that there isn't going to be time in this one for a live Q&A, but if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function, and hopefully our speakers will have time afterwards to follow up on those. And I know also they may be providing their contact details, so you can get in touch with them that way as well. So I want to give them as much time as possible. So our very first speaker will be Hannah Champion, analyst at JBA Consulting, and she's going to tell us all about modeling nature-based solutions for water quality. So Hannah, if you're ready to share your screen, I'll hand over to you.
Sorry, I can't seem to get my camera on.
Sorry, we've got your screen at the very least.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. Great. So thank you for the introduction there, Jack. I'm here to discuss some modelling work of nature-based solutions for water quality that we've done on behalf of Southern Water. So the project has these following aims. So we wanted to assess the potential for water quality benefits that could be achieved with MBS, assess whether targeted MBS could lead to a WFD, Water Framework Directive class improvement, develop a prioritised MBS opportunity maps, which are going to be used for engagement activities and based on water quality data across the catchment. And also assess the potential wider benefits, including water resources and natural capital. And then finally provide this all in a neat summary tool, which can be used for engagement in order to summarise the benefits. So we've been doing this in 3 catchments shown here on the right, in the Belt and the Yar and the Rother. So this is just a quick high-level overview. So we've done water quality modelling in field mouse. I'll provide an overview of that shortly. And this is aiming to assess whether we can target nature-based solutions in the top 10% and 25% risk areas. So we were modelling features including wetlands, woodlands, soil and land management, floodplain reconnection, runoff attenuation features, and also a combined scenario. In addition, we've also done water quality model in SAGE SimCap, which is a regulatory model. So this is used to understand whether you can get a class improvement, taking a basin from moderate to good, for example. So in addition, we also assessed the wider benefits, including water resources and natural capital, to get that holistic overview of the potential for the catchments. And as I've said, these are all summarised in a catchment explorer tool to help understand the benefits and also use this as an engagement tool. So water quality, water resources, and natural capital. So field mouse. So field mouse is a system-based model simulating the pollutant transport at the field scale across the landscape. So it's a farmland, water, or a source pathway receptor model. So it's combining farm scope of loads, river networks, DTMs, and also a land cover data set. And as part of it, it produces these 3 grids. So the travel time grid, so that's the time it takes for a pollutant to reach the point of interest. So for us here, we were looking at the WFD determination point. You can also look at the risk, the travel time to each of the river networks, but that wasn't our priority here. And then the importance raster. So this is a unit response function, or in other words, the proportion of the load that is going to reach that point of interest, which also accounts for nutrient decay both on the land and in the river. And then finally, this combines with the load data here derived from ADAS FarmScoper with the importance grid to understand the risk across the catchment. We then use this risk grid to target MBS in areas of the highest risk here, both at 10% and 25%. If you'd like any further details on foil mouse, there's a paper that's been recently published on it. Oop, I missed a slide. So Sage SimCat is our other model. So it's, yeah, as I've said, it's a regulatory model. So it's used to understand if we can get a class change from like change to good with the MBS. So these are the three catchments, and for example, the yellow lighter output suggests that we need a 0% reduction, so it's already at good status, whereas the grey suggests that we need more than 100% reduction of diffuse loads, so it wouldn't be achievable in this, whereas the blue and like the greeny colours suggest like the level of reduction that you need to achieve that change, and then we're looking with field mouse as whether MBS placed in the catchment can reach that. So in addition, we did water resources mapping, sorry. So we have some national recharge maps which have been adapted with open data, including base flow index and other BGS hydrogeology data, superfacial data, and soil texture data. So we use this to estimate the efficacy to increase the infiltration to groundwater with runoff attenuation features tagged with the potential based on these maps. In addition, we did a natural capital assessment with an economic valuation of the uplifted values of ecosystem services. So we covered things from carbon, air quality, biodiversity, and water quality as well. We found that wetlands produce the highest sequestration rate and annual economic benefits in these catchments, with woodlands given the highest benefits for air quality and biodiversity. And water quality assessment also included the landowner's willingness to pay for measures in order to improve that WFD class. So it was determined that a combination of MBS is appropriate in order to achieve the benefits across these different categories. So in order to summarize all these different assessments, we produced this subcatchment explorer tool. So there's a range of WFD basins across these three catchments, and it's a summary tool that we've used to include the water quality data if class changes are possible within that basin, and then also included data on the water resources and the natural capital in order to help people going out in the field explain the benefits that they could offer based on a subcatchment level. So in order to summarize, the modelling has these wider impacts and opportunities which are helping with data-driven design and decision-making within the communities. So the mapping outputs are providing visuals which are going to support community engagement, and also the economic valuation of the benefits that could be delivered, demonstrating the potential for nature-based solutions within the catchment, and also helping to prioritise the catchment management based on water quality. So this is leading to evidence-led justification for the projects, and also enabling co-design within the communities and stakeholders, able to see the benefits for water quality in these catchments. So thank you very much. If anyone has any further questions, I know that was a very quick run through, please feel free to email me and I'll be around after the session as well.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Yeah, as you said, if anybody does have any questions, do feel free to email them in or drop them in the chat there. Our next speaker will be Darren Tansley from Essex Wildlife Trust. He's the Wilder Rivers and Protected Species Manager, and he is going to take us back to waterfoals, which we mentioned right at the start of our conference. So, Darren, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, Yes, I'm going to talk about the data that we've been using to drive our invasive North American mink project here in the east of England. Um, this is a project that spans a whole region, and we've had quite a bit of experience mapping the presence of water voles and even mink at times at a national level. I also chair the Watervole Steering Group for the UK, and we set up the National Watervole Database back in 2006 to map what we thought would be the recovery of water voles across the UK, and it turned out to be slightly different because they were still declining. Now, in the east, we set up a project to basically control mink in the region because we realised this was the main vector for water voles disappearing at this landscape scale. And we did start off with spreadsheets, and then we moved to different databases for Norfolk, Suffolk, and Essex just to track where we were putting our mink traps and mink rafts and the number of mink captures that we were getting. I'm going to return to this because although this seemed like really good data at the time, as people have mentioned in the rest of the talks today, data is not equal to other data. Some data is more useful. After 20 years of a regional scale project of controlling mink, we were still catching hundreds every year. And we decided we would move to an eradication scheme because there's literally no exit strategy from doing mink control year on year. It's never ending. We saw new technologies coming online as we were moving through the project. And also, we felt that just trapping hundreds of animals every year was needlessly inhumane. If we could remove them entirely, future generations wouldn't have to go through that process. And so we moved to setting up the Waterlife Recovery Trust in the East, which would coordinate the project at the regional scale using remote sensing floating traps instead of clay footprints. This allowed us to get text and email alerts as soon as traps were triggered. But most importantly, all of this data is live in the database, and we knew exactly how long each trap was running, where it was running, and when. Now, we decided to pilot the project across a smaller area of about 6,000 square kilometres and see if it was possible to remove mink from that sort of area. We ran our traps all year round. We set up a single mapping database instead of the 3 that were in the original project. And every mink we captured, we took DNA samples from as well. The power of this was that we were able to, instead of just looking at the number of mink we were catching, which really means nothing. If you catch 100 mink out of 101, you've done very well. But if you've got 5,000 mink and you catch 100, you haven't done a very good job at all. Now we were able to say, what is our catch per unit effort? For every 1,000 nights that those traps are running, and remember they're in the database, we know exactly how long they're in operation for, we could generate a statistic of the number of mink that we caught during that period of time. Quickly, we were able to show that at a landscape scale, we were reducing mink numbers by around about 2/3 in a single season, a single year, full seasons. We were also then able to predict the population because we knew that 1/3 of the population would be left, and that was equivalent to half of what we'd caught in that first year. And in my home county of Essex, we quickly saw the catch per unit effort dropping dramatically as the project moved through its first years. Each of those bars is a quarter of a year, and the orange are the parts of the year where the juveniles dispersing. This is basically the summer period, around about July, August, September. A huge drop in the number of juveniles we were catching, and also a corresponding drop in the number of breeding adults we were catching just as they were setting up their territories at the beginning of the year. We also wanted to know how old these mink were, and as I say, we took every single mink that we captured for DNA analysis, and while we were doing that, we sectioned the teeth and we were able to tell which were juveniles and which were adults. And to be honest, that might not seem particularly dramatic. However, a lot of adults were being misidentified as juveniles just because they were small. Juveniles are important to an eradication scheme. We were then able to map the age frequency distribution of these animals, and we could see straight away males and females weren't even making it to their third birthday. And only a quarter of males and less than half of females actually made it to reproductive age anyway. That meant that mink were definitely vulnerable to a complete population collapse if we could remove those individuals before they got to breeding age. Our DNA allowed us to map the different genotypes of the animals across the UK through their female bloodline. So these haplotypes, really think of them as surnames. There were definite clusters. Some of these haplotypes were restricted to tiny little areas, such as number 15 on one of the islands in the west of Scotland. Others were widespread, obviously from genetic types from the original fur farms. Again, why is this important? Well, we were able to start mapping the interrelatedness of individuals that we captured. We could start to map where they were born, even if they weren't captured near to that point. Mostly we would find, as you can see with the little map in the middle there's a red dot in the middle, which is where we captured a mink, and the surrounding dots are the most likely areas where it was born. Sometimes we would find that we caught one a long distance away from where it was born. And this was important for us to map immigration into the controlled area. So we knew that this wasn't an animal that was breeding locally. The result is that since 2021, mink captures have ceased across around about 12,000 square kilometres of the eastern region, and we are virtually on the verge of completely clearing the region now. We've only had 12 mink in the whole of that area this year, all in Essex, and 5 of those were on one location. Water voles have responded by reappearing across the region, in fact, to such levels that we've had to put water vole excluders on our traps because they're being an utter pain going into them and triggering them off. But we now have a solution to the water vole decline in the UK. We know that the data we're driving through this database and through the DNA has allowed us to understand the dynamics of mink and how quickly they collapse under this sustained pressure. And this will give us a good goal going forwards to spread this across the whole of the UK. We're already working across over 50% of England. We just need to get the job done now. Anyone that wants any more information, have a look for the Water Life Recovery Trust or contact me directly. But this is, this is data-driven conservation work in practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Darren. Really great to hear how that's all played out for you. I know my local wildlife trust have had their own issues with mink, and incidentally, I did see my first ever water vole just this week. So really great to see the work that's being done there. I'll hand on now to Dr. Jo Wright from Cartographer. She's going to tell us all about MudSpotter, a citizen science sediment inflow survey. So if you took part in our big Riverwatch citizen science project just the other week, you might find this one quite interesting as well. So Jo, I'll hand over to you.
I hope everyone can hear me and see the screen. So yeah, my name's Jo Wright, and I'm here to talk about MudSpotter. It's a little bit of a change of pace than the other talks. This is more about the survey MudSpotter with a couple of examples of how it has been used. So it's a there we go. It's a citizen science fine sediment survey. It can be used by professionals as well. But basically, it's a standardized method for collecting data on fine sediment inputs to rivers and streams. And it's app-based. It literally takes a minute or two to do, so it's really easy to do. It can be done in both rural and urban areas, but the important thing is that it needs to be done during or just after rainfall events, because the idea is that you're recording flow of mud or water into rivers when it's raining, so you don't necessarily see these flows during dry times of year. All the data collected is available on a nationwide map, which I'll show you a screenshot of later, and anybody can view those data. And MudSpotter is especially useful in conjunction with other data or surveys such as water quality testing, outfall safaris, Morph River surveys, Riverfly, all that sort of thing, some of which we've been hearing about today. There's a website, which is, the link is there, and I'll put that up later on in the talk as well. So why are we bothered about mud, right? Because some rivers have mud in them, fine-grained rivers have mud in them. Well, yes, they are a part of natural river systems, but they can cause problems if they exceed the natural balance for the system. If they are, for instance, you have fine sediments in rivers where you wouldn't normally find fine sediments, such as gravel bed rivers or something like that. If they increase the suspended loads, if your river is looking turbid when it shouldn't really, it's looking really murky, then we need to know, is there too much fine sediment coming in? And they may also bind with polluting substances and nutrients, and then those polluting substances can be re-released back from the fine particles into the water. And this can cause problems for biodiversity of animals and plants, just as if you have gravels clogged in a gravel type riverbed, you might not be able to find the correct spawning places, or you might be getting extra plant growth in a system that doesn't normally have lots of plant growth. Now, so this is the form. There is a paper form, but normally you would do it on the app. But this basically shows all the information that needs to be collected. And most of these are just tick boxes. And on the app, there'll be drop-down menus or tick boxes. So basically, it's really, really quick. And also, the app shows the photos of the types of pollutants that you've got. There's at the bottom, you can see a sort of little picture showing you what the definition of clear or coloured or translucent or opaque water is. And also, it also shows you whether these things are small, medium or large, and tells you what those sizes are. So you don't need to remember anything. It's all there on the app. You just go, okay, it's a metre wide, it's a centimetre wide, and you tick the correct box there. So it's very, very easy to use. So this is an example of one of the pictures that you'd see in the app. So you've got different sediment sources, for instance, like disturbed bank face, overland flow, ditch, pipe, or culvert. And then you just identify what type it is, and then go from there and decide different sizes of the sediment input. So if we look at the map of MudSpotter surveys to date, so I pulled this off at the beginning of this week, you can see that there's definite cluster in the southeast, sort of north and west of London. But there are MudSpotter surveys in other parts of the country. We've got them up as far north as north of Middlesbrough, and we also have them down by Plymouth and on the south coast, and a few in Wales. We are training people all the time. So we've just trained a group in Dorset. We're about to train a group in North Yorkshire. So we are getting more MudSpotters trained up all the time. But you can see some of these clusters, the Kennet and Pang, Chilterns Chalk, Lee MudSpotters. And if we zoom in on that, you can see some of these clusters in more detail. The different colours correspond to the different types of mud source on the river, and I'll show you that key in a minute. And I'm going to zoom in on a couple of examples just to show how MudSpot has been used on river survey research. So the first one we'll look at is the river chest. This is probably the most complete study that's done so far with using MudSpotter amongst other techniques. And they were looking at sediment entry points to the river in Chesham. And this is showing you their mud spotting results. So you can see, for instance, the red dots are disturbed bank faces. The pale green is overland flow. You can't really see ditches. There's pipes, those are dark blue, and then there's culverts in pink. And you can see clearly and unsurprisingly that down in sort of more rural areas, you've got the red disturbed bank faces, whereas in the town, in Chesham, for instance, there's lots of pipes and culverts and things, and overland flow, which could be from, for instance, paths and roads. And that it can indicate the different sorts of flows that are going into the river, and as well as with things like outfall safaris, which can identify mystery pipes, you can also be identifying other flows that come into the river during wet times, and this may be having a big input of not only mud but also other pollutants. So they identified a number of areas in Chesham during these wet weather mud spotter surveys. You can see how the surveyors look a bit soggy when they're doing these surveys, and basically that can give a pointer on where to do research and what types of features might be causing pollution in the river. So they identified agricultural runoff from steep valley sides and urban runoff from unmetalled parking areas and road verges. So again, where to focus things on, think about, can we put up barriers? Can we put up baffles? Could there be extra planting? Could you think about, not having bare fields at certain times of year? So this, as part of a larger study, they were using MudSpotter. So MudSpotter was used to determine sediment entry points to the river, and then some of this suspended sediment was collected and analysed with Queen Mary, University of London. There was also sediment source apportionment, so looking at the colour of the sediment and finding out where it might have come from, road, dust, or agriculture, or something like that. And then after that, they were looking at the ecological impacts of the sediment in the river using things like the Smart River Citizen Science method. Another example is a mud spotter on the River Bean in Hertfordshire. This map shows the mud spotter locations that were surveyed, and this was also done in conjunction with Morph River Surveys, Riverfly, and Outfall Safari. The maps for all of which are also hosted on Cartographer, so that they can be compared together, and that can be really useful. And what's happened is that this has led to some action on sewage outfalls by water companies, and then their next steps were to support farmers and reduce runoff from fields. So as I said, we continue to train mud spotters. There's the manual, mud spotter manual available online, and also there's a website where you can find the manual and health and safety requirements and other resources. This is the website, modularriversurvey.org MudSpotter. And if you would like more information on MudSpotter or to get training in MudSpotter, if you could please email training@cartographer.io. And this training can be in person or can be delivered online, depending on location and what the group's requirements are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. Really great to hear about that as well. So thank you finally to all three of our speakers just now. And as said, if you have any questions, do feel free to get in touch with them. I'll hand over to Becca now, who's going to introduce our next panel. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to Hannah, Darren, and Jo for such interesting presentations, and amazingly well timed as well, which is quite a rarity on these conferences. As people know, that's a little bit of a preoccupation to me. And thank you to Jack, who, by the way, is on his first Rivers Trust annual conference today, and just doing a really good job helping out behind the scenes and on camera now as well. So we now come to our final panel discussion of the day, and I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague Charlotte Stannard at the Rivers Trust for this. She is our Eastern Partnerships and Water Governance Officer, and Charlotte herself is doing really interesting work across catchments in the east of England, so I think she's perfectly placed to chair this discussion, which I am really looking forward to. So hopefully, Charlotte, you are ready to turn your camera and mic on and take us away. There you are. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Becca. And welcome everybody to the almost last session of the day. Well done for sticking with us. It's been a really fascinating day. And in a moment, I've got three speakers I'm going to introduce you to, but I'm just going to give a little introduction. This session is called Getting It Done. What is the gold standard for evidence-led holistic land and water management? Well, we talk a lot in this sector about being joined up, about managing land and water together, about working at catchment scale, and about being guided by evidence. But the reality is, as we all know, it is often hard to turn those ideas into practice. Funding is fragmented, monitoring is under-resourced, and we don't always have the data we need to prove what works. So today is really about getting practical. What does good actually look like on the ground? Well, as Becca said, my name is Charlotte Stannard, and my journey at the Rivers Trust began in January 2023. I coordinated the Cam and Ely Hughes Catchment Partnership, also known as Cameo. The Rivers Trust had been the host since 2013 when they began, and in 2025 we transferred the hosting to the River Lark Catchment Partnership. I still work for Cameo 1 day a week supporting the new host. And the new host, the River Lark Catchment Partnership, has a chair called Ros Alexander, who is a forward-thinking ex-academic. Ros, along with the Environment Agency, commissioned a fluvial report undertaken by David Sear, Professor in Physical Geography at Southampton University. One of the key things that came out of the study was a map known as Beads on a String. And it's caused a lot of interest in the east of England, which is a very water-stressed area, as you'll probably all know. The analysis found that the catchment naturally forms a series of meres and pingos where water wants to collect. These are the beads. Between them are the more linear channels, known as the strings, which move water through the landscape. Both parts are essential, and they work together as a system. The beads store water, carbon, and sediment, while the strings connect and route flows. The key point is that this is natural infrastructure, as David Sear puts it. It's how the system is meant to function. But in many places, we know we've altered the rivers so much that these processes have been disrupted. So, if we want to manage land and water well, we first need to understand how water wants to behave and work with that rather than against it. The beads on a string map is proving of great interest to farmers in the catchment who are facing great water shortages, and Ros has set up a farm cluster on the back of it, and it will also become part of the Heritage Lottery bid fund for Bury St Edmunds Abbey. So, key question for today: how do we work with the landscape again, understanding how water wants to behave, and how do we build the evidence to support this approach? To explore that, we've got 3 brilliant speakers working in different contexts. First, we have Clare Bullen, who's the CEO of Mersey Rivers Trust. And Clare is working on integrated water management in Liverpool, looking at how urban systems can be better connected and managed as a whole. And I have to say that integrated water management, IWM, is tripping off everybody's lips at the moment. So it's something that I'm fascinated in. Second, we have Cheryll Wilson, Head of Rural Transformation at Enfield Council, which is a borough in North London. Not everyone would associate that role with an urban council in London, a rural transformation, but she'll be telling us a bit about what they're doing up there. So Enfield Council is both a landowner and is leading a landscape recovery project, so bringing together policy, land management, and long-term environmental change. And third, we have Chris Spray, who's Eddleston Water Science Manager at the Tweed Forum. So the Tweed Forum works across a large rural catchment to deliver natural flood management measures with rigorous monitoring and evaluation supported by an academic partner. Each speaker will give us a brief overview of their work, and then we'll open it up to a discussion and Q&A. So could I please ask the speakers to turn on their cameras? Welcome. Thank you very much. And I'd like to start with Clare, if you don't mind, because I think you're giving us a sort of big picture of what's possible on integrated water management. So would you like to give us a brief interview, or a brief introduction, and an interview of what you're doing at Mersey Rivers Trust?
Thanks, Charlotte. Hi, everybody. So geography-wise, Mersey Rivers Trust, it covers the whole of the Mersey Basin, which starts life in the uphills of Manchester and the lowlands of Cheshire and flows through those two counties before reaching Merseyside and the sea. So huge populations, hugely industrial legacy for the rivers. And interestingly, since 2023, when Greater Manchester Combined Authority worked with various partners on an integrated water management plan, we find ourselves doing one for Liverpool currently. So I'll start by saying what we mean by integrated, because lots of organisations use the word, and often it's they mean internally they're looking across departments and trying not to work in silos. And I suppose an integrated water management plan it takes it up another level. So it's anybody that's interested in water, whether that's the water company or the regulator, and it brings together anybody with an interest, anyone that has a plan that relates to water, to bring it into a place-based context. So flood risk, drought risk, resilience, water quality, pollution, transport, development, growth, all those issues that affect a place and can affect our places quite differently depending on where you are. Looking at what do we all want out of this, what's our shared vision, and how can we better work together to deliver a single outcome for the people and for the environment of that place. Hope that's enough of an introduction, and we can come on to questions later.
Thank you. That's very interesting definition. Thank you, Claire. And that's very interesting. Cheryll, can I ask you to introduce yourself and your work?
Yeah, of course. Hi, thank you for having me. First of all, yes, Rural Transformation, Head of Rural Transformation, obviously is a very unusual title for a London borough and often gets eyebrows raised. But Enfield as a place actually has around 1,000 hectares of rural farmland on the west side of the borough, with then the east and south being highly urban. So even though we're described in the landscape recovery scheme world as a peri-urban environment, it is a really truly urban experience when you are down in Enfield. And we're really fortunate that we've been able to be one of the first pilot schemes on the landscape recovery ELMS projects, and I think one of the only local authorities in the first 22 pilots. We've got about 1,500 hectares which are included in our project. And that is our larger parkland spaces, as well as our rural side, on which we've got around 10 tenants that are in situ. We actually own all the land in the project, but our tenants are on Agricultural Holding Act tenancies in the majority. So we've really worked in collaboration with them, creating this ELMS project. What we have had throughout the scheme is where sort of DEFRA and EA and Natural England have sort of caught themselves up as well with the project. There has been further input from them, whereas before it was very much a blank page. And we've had to kind of navigate some of the changes that have come through those central government bodies. However, we're getting to the end point of our project and we're into negotiation. So very exciting stage for us.
Thank you, Cheryll. That's really interesting. And Chris.
Good afternoon from north of the border. I'm the science manager for the Eddleston Water Project. That's Scottish Government's long-running research study of the effectiveness of natural flood management measures to reduce flood risk and to improve riverine habitats. So it's managed by Tweed Forum, and along with SEPA and Scottish Borders Council, we've been working on this since 2010. We were very lucky in the sense that we started with a scoping study, which did a complete catchment characterization, fluvial audit, produced a monitoring strategy and a stakeholder engagement strategy, and then had 2 years of baseline monitoring before we did anything at all. These are the things that people just don't normally have the luxury to do, and it's hats off to Scottish Government for actually funding and keeping going. And we're now 16 years into this. We also got 5 years of funding from the European Union. And what we're trying to do is to really test whether things work empirically. So it's arguably the most monitored catchment of its size, 69 kilometres squared, in the United Kingdom. I think we have 64 bits of hydrological kit out there. It's also got a dramatically large ecological monitoring component. I think at the last count, we estimated we looked at 300,000 macroinvertebrates individually. My eyes are doing very well. Luckily, it wasn't me looking at them. But we were lucky in the sense that we were really looking for high quality data. So we set up backy approaches before or after control intervention to test things. And then we've looked at the trajectory of recovery as we've gone through to something like 12 years after it. We've focused mainly on hydrology and on ecology. And if you want an overall picture, we've done 22 farms we've worked with. We've put in 135 leaky barriers, built 42 temporary storage ponds, remeandered 3.5 kilometres of river, taken down about 2 kilometres of embankments, and planted something like 340,000 native trees. And the overall picture, 10 years, 12 years down the line, is that NFM works, you'll be pleased to know. But it does have a lot of caveats, and the caveats are that you need a lot of NFM, you need to do it across the whole catchment, you need lots of different measures, and it's not going to stop the 1 in 50s. This is 1 in 50 year floods. This is really effective in small catchments for small scale floods. So really nicely, we're providing the empirical basis for some quite nice modelling. I'll end with one other factor, which is that we've looked at what we could do. So we've got a very good catchment model with JBA developed for us. And if we put everything on, the kitchen sink it's known as, we can reduce the flood risk as it hits the downturn site of Peebles by 44% on a 1 in 30 year flood. That's made up by lots of different elements, as I said. And to put that in context, what SEPA would require for an addition for climate change by 2010. So if you put in a flood wall and you modelled it, SEPA would then ask you to improve it and increase it by 59%. So even if we throw the kitchen sink at it, we can only take 44%. We've also done environmental economics, so we can tell you exactly how much that will save you. And one of the other interesting things from this is that the value of the other ecosystem services, other than flood damages avoided, is 4 times the value of flood damages avoided themselves. So it's a really holistic study. It wasn't a community bottom-up study, it was a research study. It is absolutely dependent upon the community, and we work with them really tightly now, mainly through all the work of Tweed Forum.
Thanks, Chris. South of the border, just tell us who SEPA is.
Sorry, SEPA is the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. It's like EA. The big difference is, though, that SEPA are not a flood authority. North of the border, it is the local authorities. So it would be Enfield, in Enfield, or it'd be Mersey. So in our case, it's Scottish Borders Council. They're the people with the diggers. They're the people with the flood schemes that they put forward, centrally funded. So that's the difference between north and south of the border.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a couple of questions myself, and then I'd encourage you to put questions in the Q&A. And my first question goes to Clare, and I'd like to ask you about the complex environment that you're working in Liverpool, where there are lots of competing priorities and stakeholders. And I know it's very early days for the Integrated Water Management Plan in Liverpool, but has there been any sort of effectiveness in actually joining things up? And have you seen any of that on the ground? And how do you build an evidence base when monitoring budgets are so tight? So that's 2 questions in one, really. So are you seeing any joined upness? And how are you building in monitoring and evidence when the budgets are so tight?
Let me try and answer that, Charlotte. So I think, early days, like you say, but what I've and Liverpool has the benefit of learning from Greater Manchester, who've gone and done it, and with the local rivalry, obviously they want to do it bigger and better. So there's lots of lessons that we can learn from how Manchester did it, and I think genuinely, I think it will be better just because we've done it once, and it's kind of easier second time round. I think there's a slightly different focus on it. And also from having the experience in the local authority of doing the local nature recovery strategies, they learn a lot from that about how to work with partners and how to kind of really own something and drive it forward, which is really impressive. So I think everybody's got the right attitude in the sort of the team, and we've got the right relationships, which really helps. We've got the political will, which is really important. And I think that's what differentiates this perhaps from catchment partnerships, where we've been doing this for a long time. And yet you put a very strong political figure, a mayor like Andy Burnham or Steve Rotherham behind it, and things happen. Investment starts going in differently. You actually see different decisions being made when everybody's aligned. And I'm really interested to see if that's just a thing here in the Northwest, or whether that's actually replicable in other combined authorities. So yeah, that's the kind of how it's going so far. In terms of monitoring, we have a huge population and a huge demand from people that want to be citizen scientists and help out. And my challenge is trying to do that in a safe and coordinated and strategic way, so that we get the data where we need it. And that's something that I'm open to working with partners and sponsors on, to try and get that more structured, more strategic program of monitoring, so we know how bad it is, or maybe it's not as bad as we thought. It's certainly not as bad as it was 30 years ago. And then where do we need to look to find issues to inform priorities?
Well, I find that fascinating that you've got this rivalry between Liverpool and Manchester that might be boosting you all on, which is very helpful. And also, I feel hopeful for areas where we're going to experience devolved councils and have mayors, and hope that we can learn, from what you're doing up there. So you might have lots of people contacting you, asking you to sort of share your learning, but that's very interesting. And that's great. Thank you, Claire. And I'm going to come to Cheryll now. I think as a landowner, as well as a public authority, Enfield Council is in a unique position to take a long-term view. And I wonder, how are you approaching monitoring and evidence in your landscape recovery project, Cheryll?
Yeah, so we have been quite extensive as part of the requirements of the DEFRA project. You have to produce a MEL, so monitoring, evaluating, and a learning report. And that was actually completed in partnership with Thames 21, who have been our main partner on the project. We've also had some really good input from the Rivers Trust as well. So the MEL sat with Thames 21, and they were able to produce a report to cover a huge amount of baselining that we covered. And I don't want to go through the detailed list, but just some of the main topics that we were looking at was obviously our ecological conditioning, and that was both terrestrial, and we were using biodiversity net gain baselining, as well as biodiversity net gain for water habitats as well. Then there was lots of detailed sort of pollution levels, fluvial audits that were done on the water and hydrology side. Soil conditioning, we've also had carbon assessments completed, looking at the farming and actual land management systems as well, but then dipping into the people, obviously being a local authority and living right against hundreds of thousands of people. The actual social side of what this project can bring is huge. So we looked at what access was going to be available, what recreational use we could look at. So really baselining a huge amount of things across the board. And I think what that means is that in the future, that's going to give us the opportunity to have that natural capital built into this. And I think that's where the Elms project is really individual, is the sense of getting that private investment. So making sure that you baseline everything right at the beginning gives you the opportunity to produce that evidence of growth, and ergo you could potentially sell the credits to the voluntary markets, as well as obviously our more structured B&G and or carbon markets. Those are the real opportunities that have come out of this project. And fortunately, we've been funded well enough that we've been able to actually achieve all of those in the first instance.
And you said earlier that the project started in 2023. And so what's the length of the project then? Has it got a sort of end date in mind, or is it just ongoing?
Yeah, so our feasibility started in 2023. I came on board January 24 to direct the project, and that was when we sort of picked up momentum on it. It's been 2 years near enough on putting everything together, and we're into the negotiation stages with DEFRA. So we're really coming to a real exciting time to then begin the works that we're looking to do. I mean, fortunately, Enfield Council have always been incredibly proactive. We've already planted like 150,000 trees on the Enfield Chase landscape already. We're the first London borough to have beavers. So this is not brand new things for us. This has just given us the opportunity to manage it in a landscape way, because we know the individual projects work. So obviously it made it very easy for DEFRA to trust us to move into this larger project.
And are you monitoring the impact of the beavers?
Yes, yeah, we monitor that with our partners at Capel Manor College. So we've had obviously the beavers in situ, I think from 2019. So we've got really good evidence of the work that they're doing. So much so we've actually had to expand their enclosure, not only because we've got a larger family there, but actually the benefits are able to expand into wider spaces. So we're able to start capturing that water capacity more. So that's been really successful. And the Landscape Recovery Project is a 20-year programme. So whatever we choose to sign up to as part of this, we have to monitor it for 20 years to demonstrate our success. And we're negotiating with DEFRA about habitat management payments, which means if we don't achieve what we're saying we're going to do, then those payments reduce. So there's a real incentive from central government to make sure that we're doing this right for the public benefits and the public purse.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I'm going to come on to Chris now. And you're doing something quite rare in having rigorous monitoring built into a large-scale natural flood management programme. And you've spoken quite a lot about this already, but what do you think are the key things you've learned so far? I know you've mentioned some already, Chris, but what are the really important things that you've learned?
Okay, I mean, I think the four main measures we've done, I'll run through those. We haven't got beavers yet. I think they'll arrive sooner or later. They're across a lot of Scotland. But our leaky dams at the top of the catchment, they're amazingly effective, very cheap and cheerful in slowing the flow. So we've got something in the region between 2.5 and 7 hour delays of flows on streams that have them compared to the streams that haven't got them. Now that dissipates as you go down the catchment, obviously, but it's working still at about 25 square kilometres, which is really, really quite effective because these are very cheap and cheerful. They don't add much for biodiversity. As I said, a beaver dam would, but beavers go where beavers would like to. These at least stay where we put them. The ponds are really interesting. You need an awful lot of ponds and you need them to be empty to start working. So they only really work in small catchments. And we, as I said, we've got 42 of them. We've got the maximum we're allowed, which is 20,000 cubic meters. South of the border, you're only allowed 10,000 cubic meters, by the way. But most of ours are much smaller than that. But they do work in small catchments for small scale events. What they're also really good at is dragonfly populations. So we've got some really nice published data on the impact of building ponds and how good flood ponds are, far better than other ponds. In terms of the meandering, what's really interesting there is that you create a much more diverse habitat. So we've got a lot of deep pools, which are really important after we've re-meandered, because that's where the temperature can be counted, because we've got rising temperatures, very bad news for salmon. But our deep pools are much, much colder. And we've got way more very fast flowing gravel riffles, which are where the salmon breed, and you get a lot of macroinvertebrates. The macroinvertebrate data is really spectacular. As I said, it's huge amounts of data. We're just sending it off for publication, we hope. But that's showing, again, a really impressive recovery over time as you go forward. In terms of trees, probably the spectacular two information bits are really mature trees infiltrate 8 times as much rainfall than the adjacent sheep pastures. That'll be something that I'm sure a lot of folk will not be surprised about, but it's nice to have the data there showing it. And rough grassland is actually still quite good. And you can model, but it is modeling the impact of tree planting at scale, which will have an impact, but you are therefore occupying a lot of farmland from that point of view. And the meanders, the other thing about meanders is if all you do is meander, you don't actually gain a lot for flood management. You need to open up your floodplains, and that's where the main gain from that is. And the other thing I'd say is that whilst the monitoring has been really tight, really good, all publicly funded, so it's open for anyone else to come and play with and come and work with us. And I think so far we've had well over £2 million worth of extra funds coming in from other people. Is the one thing that we haven't done, and that is we haven't changed the way the land is farmed, and that is something we'd really like to do. So we haven't gone for regenerative farming. We haven't looked at water in the landscape and the way it's farmed. We're looking at that in an adjacent catchment in the line water. But I think that's the missing element if one's looking at the totality of natural flood management from our aims.
That's interesting. Can I go to a question in the Q&A from Steve? Have you also quantified the NFM drought benefits, Chris? It was something we were chatting about earlier, isn't it? Are you happy to just say a word about that?
It's a really interesting question. When this was set up, and remember we're talking 2010, the two bits that are never mentioned are climate change or nature-based solutions. They just weren't on the agenda. Come now, we've just had a review with the Scottish Government and Scottish Environment Protection Agency of our aims, and water scarcity is now one of our new aims. So we've just done a review of our whole hydrometric surface water monitoring network, and we're going to have to change it because what you can do for measuring high flows is very different to what you need to measuring low flows. So we're going to have to alter that. But yes, Scottish Government and everyone else are really interested in water scarcity. So that's a really good question.
Very good question. And Cheryll, you're getting some applaud, really, because most London boroughs aren't anywhere near as positive as Enfield. So a big up, Enfield Council. And so anyone, please add your questions, but I've got another question. So this is for Claire. Integrated water management often depends on organisations working together in ways they haven't before. What have been the biggest barriers to collaboration and what has helped overcome them?
Good question. I think there are a few technical barriers, but most barriers are around cultures. So thinking of the technical barriers, and this is a big one, the management of SUDs. Say a local authority are convinced to keep them in the design of a development by the water company who pays for them to keep rainwater out of the system. Who maintains it? How do you maintain it? These have been questions that have been around for a long time, and we're really testing that now in practice. So that's been one of the technical barriers. But in terms of other barriers, it's mainly around getting people to think beyond their own assets or beyond their own processes and see everything from the perspective of the river, as I would like, or the place and the people that we are essentially doing it for, whoever we are. And once you get that way of thinking, it really then sort of breaks down the barriers and builds better relationships because we've got a common reason why we're there. And one of the things that the Greater Manchester sort of core team of people did was to co-locate. So once a week, people from every organisation worked together in an office, and that really helped. In Liverpool, we're doing that sort of more remotely, but relationships are more in existence. So we're sort of over that first hurdle already. But yeah.
I like the idea of co-location. That seems eminently sensible. And yeah, so excellent idea there. And no, brilliant question or a brilliant answer. That's really, really useful. Chris, there's a question for you in the Q&A. I was struck by how effective trees were as well, compared to, say, sheep pasture. Surely even encouraging more trees within sheep fields would be useful without reducing grazing greatly and have the added benefit of sheltering sheep from the elements. So, yeah, so what you said about trees was striking, yeah.
Yeah, trees score across lots of ways because obviously they infiltrate, and so they intercept rainfall, as well as having evapotranspiration, as well as infiltrating, as well as providing roughage in terms of roughness and Manning's End to slow flows. I mean, the challenge with trees is just that they're going to occupy land that can't be therefore used for farming unless you go for agroforestry, and I'm not sure how good agroforestry is for natural flood management. Maybe this is something we ought to be looking more at in that sense. But certainly they are effective, undoubtedly. Yeah, and they have clearly really good biodiversity gains as well.
Well, I wonder, I mean, my dream would be to plant trees all across the city that I live in, because there's a very big hill in Norwich, and there's a surface water management plan where there are 3 critical drainage catchments where there's expectation of serious flooding if there's a flash flood, and I wonder why that their trees aren't being put back onto streets where they were taken off, so they're just sort of concrete streets with nothing to stop the flow if there's a flash flood. So yes, I'm not sure about trees and why we're not sort of planting them, but I guess they cost money, they need managing. So yes, it's a challenge. So, we've got another couple of questions down there. Chris, do you mind if I come to you again? Did the Tweed Forum face a fair amount of skepticism from landowners at first? And has that changed at all with your research findings?
That's another really good question. We ended up where we ended up in the Eddleston water because of a landowner who actually came to Tweed Forum and said, I've got a very boring piece of river. To be fair, it was straightened in about 1801 to build a road, not to do anything else, and was interested in what we would do. And we had a look at that site, but I think one of the key things of Tweed Forum, and if there's one learning, is that it is what we call a trusted intermediary. So we talked to that landowner. We then walked upstream and downstream and found another site and just literally went in and talked to the next landowner and said, what do you reckon? Could we re-meander this bit? And what Tweed Forum offers is to take all the admin out of it and to put the money up front so that the farmer loses nothing. And if it goes wrong, we'll come back and make sure it's working again. So there's a huge degree of trust in this as to how we operate and where we go and how we go. And that seems to work very well. There are some farmers that don't particularly like what we do. There are some farmers who think it's absolutely brilliant. There's nothing special about that catchment. That's what it's meant to be. It's meant to just be a normal catchment. The one advantage is 30 minutes from Edinburgh. So a lot of people will come down and see it. And one of our roles is to disseminate and show local authorities, businesses, Scottish government, ministers, whoever else, what we're doing and what works, and then talk to them about what are the barriers from a farmer's point of view to going up with this. And they're mainly financial, as you might expect, and business models. If you're going to tell a farmer that you're going to take his field, and they nearly all are his, take his field and plant trees on it, that's going to ruin his business model for how he runs the farm. So no, we've just got every single variation, and we talk to them, as people who understand farming. And we have a meeting regularly with the farmers where we ban the Environment Agency and the council and the consultants and the academics and anyone else, and just talk to the farmers and the community and listen to them.
And I think in a previous conversation, Chris, you have said that, people can be shown around and, you're happy to share the learning widely. So if people are interested, can they contact you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've taken River Restoration Centre, we've taken SciEM round it recently. Everyone from the American Army Corps of Engineers downwards, or upwards, probably downwards. But yeah, really important. And from our point of view, what's excellent is we tap into your knowledge and your views and your perspectives, which will be different. And you ask the stupid questions we've never thought of, which is so valuable to us.
No, that's brilliant. And so there's another question. Can I direct this to Cheryll? So you've talked a lot about monitoring and the baseline you've captured, and you've worked with Thames 21, and you've said, that this is information that you're feeding back to the government. But are you also feeding to the communities as well? So the people who live in Enfield, are they receiving information? Are you communicating with them about what you're trying to do?
Yeah, probably not as much as we'd like to. We've just not been in a position where we've been able to communicate it effectively on a more broader spectrum. We do have a really strong appetite for when we're fully up and running to have our sort of own website pages, so then people can even see the changes that have been, if not be involved through citizen science. We've already got very small areas of volunteers that come on like a Tuesday and they help us with waterfall monitoring and things like that. But we really do want to ramp it all up. I think because we've had to be so focused on drilling down into the minutiae to start this baselining, we haven't had the opportunity yet to really go out to the general public and say, look at this fantastic work we're doing. This is where we're at. This is where we're going to be, and you can follow that all the way along and see the improvements being made.
No, that's brilliant. And Claire, I know that integrated water management is a lot about setting up processes. So might be quite a long way down the line before you can say we've had success. But in your mind, what does success look like with integrated water management? What would be a real win for you?
For me, I always come back to, yes, it's all right to have policies and processes, but what can you point at on the ground that is different as a result of doing this work? That's why I'm here. And the way that we think about it is that investment decisions are made collaboratively, and we see different investment in the future to what might have been. So rather than the water company doing some kind of treatment or building some sort of tank, and then the council will go in the next year and dig up the road and do something else. It's like infrastructure happening at the same time. And my interest as a kind of catchment partnership representative is that the environment is at the heart of that. So is that the best solution? Are we answering a legal obligation, or are we answering a local need here? Hopefully both of them can be done. And so just really challenging what the solution is to make sure that we're getting the right one rather than the one that just ticks the box. And hopefully a lot of people can understand that. And it's what we've been wanting for a long time. And this seems to be the vehicle for it. And if we think ahead to regional systems planner, thinking even bigger picture, this could be how catchment partnerships can influence the decisions that are made about water management in the future. So interesting times.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're representing the voice of the river, really, aren't you, in your approach? So that's really interesting. And just quickly coming on to a question that we discussed earlier, Cheryll, you brought up the question of growth. Because that is a huge issue in the east and southeast of England, where we're water stressed. We're also having this pressure of enormous house building. And you had a very interesting point to make, that you have a sort of a town being planned in Enfield. Is that correct? And how is it being handled there, the growth issue?
Well, we have been shortlisted, which Nothing for definite, of course, until central government say so. But what we have noted in what has come through is that Enfield's new town is being scheduled to be landscape led. And what that means is the landscape recovery scheme will have the opportunity to really be built into the design of the new town. And what that should offer is, first of all, an amazing opportunity for people who are going to live in that space to be integrated into the rewilding that's happening in that catchment, but also preventatively having the catchment supported through flood mechanisms to allow for growth. We've got other areas in Enfield, such as Meridian Water, where we've had to have really strong water support because of the area to build on brownfield, and now moving up higher into the catchment, we're just looking to see whether the landscape recovery project is going to support that growth, and vice versa. Essentially, where we're looking at that private investment, will the influx of development allow to support the care and ongoing maintenance, rather than it be all central government supported and other private investment? This is going to give us the opportunity to see what matching can come from those developments.
No, that's very interesting. I'm just trying to monitor the chat and the Q&A, and there's a very long comment in I wish I could bring somebody on and say, oh, please speak to that yourself. But I think just in the last few minutes, I'd like to ask you all, and I'll start with Chris. If you could change one thing nationally to improve evidence-led land and water management, whether policy, funding, regulation, or data collection, what would it be? It's the magic wand question.
Okay, the magic wand question would be to change the way we fund land management in Scotland, which is different to England, by the way. Because if we could walk onto a farm knowing that we could pay the farmer an appropriate amount of money to change the way he manages water on his farm, that would be superb. We could monitor that very easily. So it's actually the single thing we'd love to be able to do, because then we could do the one thing, as I said, we haven't done, which is actually change the way the land is managed. And we could tie in with soil and climate resilience. It's integrated, as Claire says, it's a real integrated approach. So I would love to have the ability to do that. The figure I told you earlier on, Charlotte, is that the average farm in Scotland makes £33,000 a year, but we, the public, pay £46,000 of that. So there's an 11,000 deficit. Public services for public goods. I want the farmers paid a really good amount of money to do not just producing food, but actually maybe farming floods as well. So change that.
Yeah, and you did mention that Scotland's in a unique position. It's a little bit in limbo with its farming subsidies, isn't it? So
I couldn't say on a day like today.
No, you can't say like on a day sorry, yes, to lead you down that one. And can I ask the magic wand question to Cheryll? If there was one thing that you could do nationally to improve evidence-led land and water management, whether policy, funding, regulation, or data collection, what would you... It's a bit unfair to put you on the spot here, but
No, it's
wave your
fine.
magic wand.
Yeah, for me, I would love for biodiversity net gain to already be 5 years down the line, because at the moment it feels so new and so interchangeable. There's an amazing opportunity to make it work well for our catchment spaces and work with developers in a way that's really structured. But because it's still new, it feels like it's a risk at the moment to take those steps. So that would be my ideal, that we're in the future, we know how it works, and we're all settled. So Enfield doesn't have to be one of those risk takers. That's how I feel at the moment.
Yeah, you're sort of pioneering the approach, are you? And it's a bit risky.
It feels that way.
Yeah. And can I ask that same question to Claire in the last minute?
Yes, and my answer is something that has already been said at some point today, which is the integration of funding. We can integrate our policies and our plans, but those funding mechanisms are still prohibitive at sometimes at combining them, which doesn't help. Obviously, more funding would be good. And I know Rivers Trust are working hard with DEFRA to talk about how monitoring money is spent nationally so that we get a better picture of the rivers rather than just, oh, so and so wants to know this bit here. If we were going to spend trillions of pounds on the environment, where would we spend it? What would we do? And I think that would look quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd all wish for that, the joining up of funding. Well, thank you so much to the speakers, Claire, Cheryll, and Chris. It was a really interesting discussion. Thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm now going to hand over to Mark, or Becca even.
Yeah, I'm just going to come in between very, very quickly before Mark brings the conference to a complete close. I'm just going to do my usual huge thank yous to everyone who has contributed to putting this event on today. So including all of our panel speakers, people who have delivered presentations, people who have chaired talks, people behind the scenes, and obviously everyone who has attended, a good 500 people throughout the day at least, I think. So just huge thanks. You will be prompted in emails and when you close this to fill out a short feedback survey. We always really, really appreciate that feedback and we do genuinely use it year on year to plan our events. So if you could dedicate just a few minutes of your day or your week to filling out that survey, it'd be really appreciated. But I shan't hold things up any further. We've been here for a few hours now and I'm sure we've got lots of other things to do. So just with thanks again, I'll hand over to our Chief Executive, Mark Lloyd, for our closing reflections. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Becca, and thanks for that fantastic panel. It's been such a high quality of presentations today. So yeah, really grateful to everyone. And I'm not going to keep you long. I'm sure you're keen to have a cup of tea or go and sort your emails. But I just wanted to try and sort of summarize the day and a few reflections that I've had. And I think we started off talking about the water reforms in England and Wales. And I think there's really exciting potential there to kind of build a new system for water management. It's clear, I think, from everything we've said today that data is absolutely fundamental to the success of that new system. Hence our conference title today. And really the current situation, as we've heard many times today, I think is that data is very patchy and not joined up. There is often a lot of it, but it's all in separate little boxes in different formats. And I think there's probably quite a random approach to collection. I think there's probably quite a lot of data collected without really a plan for what's going to happen with it and why it's being collected. And I think the upshot of all of that is that we don't really know the detail of the problem that we're trying to solve in each catchment. And ultimately, that leads to multi-billion-pound decisions being taken based on pretty dodgy data. And I don't think we can continue to do that. We've had a crack at this, as Michelle said, with our Casco project, the Catchment Systems Thinking Cooperative, over the last 3 years, demonstrating in 8 catchments how you can bring together data from multiple sources and build a catchment plan to identify, what you don't know, what you need to know, and then go and find that out. And taking a kind of weight of evidence approach, so bringing together multiple sources of data to give you that kind of overall understanding to inform investigations and investment. So we've developed a roadmap from that and the recommendations to the government, and we're pressing the government very hard to make integrated catchment monitoring a key part of these water reforms that they're bringing forward, and hopefully we can spread that to the rest of the British Isles as well. We heard about our nature-based solutions database. I think, it's really encouraging. Every conference I go to, I just hear about more and more stuff going on at bigger scale. And, these things are being done across catchments. But if we're going to take an integrated approach to management of catchments, we really need to know what everyone is doing and what everyone else is doing, as well as us. So that we can join that up and take a kind of coordinated strategic view. So I think having a single source of data is really, really important, and hopefully you will have a look at that and use it and promote the concept. In the afternoon, we had a really amazing session about protected landscapes. I thought Mary Ann spoke incredibly eloquently about storytelling and collaboration. I loved her line that data is key, but it's not king. People drive change, and it's those relationships between people and organizations which are so important. And the panel discussion, it was so clear the value of having that shared data and the need to sort of join up land and water and break up these silos. I think our whole political system and management system seems to be built on these vertical columns rather than horizontal layers, and we really, really need to smash that up. And I think ultimately, it's clear we need to transform our landscapes if we're going to build resilience and restore healthy rivers. It's clear from the mud spotter presentation, the importance of monitoring sediment, such an important issue. It brings in so many pollutants into rivers, but it also has a physical impact on the bed of rivers. So being able to monitor that and take action accordingly, really, really useful. And ultimately, this is about restoring our soils, re-wetting our peat, putting in more ponds, wetlands, planting more trees, more re-wiggled rivers, reconnected to floodplains, as we've just heard from Chris. And you need to do sort of all of those things across the landscape. But obviously, we need to balance that with farming. So the data that we have enables us to target those interventions and put them in the place where they can have the biggest benefit, and so that we can really understand how water wants to behave in the landscape, which was a lovely line from Charlotte, I think. And really great, that last panel, hearing the amazing examples of work on Tweed in Liverpool and Enfield. These examples are becoming ever more common. They used to be rare as hen's teeth, and now you keep tripping over them throughout the country. But I think the problem is that they're happening in spite of the system rather than because of the system. So, it really feels like the case for water reform is so strong. The potential is huge, but we really need that system to kind of enable us to do much more of this work at much greater scale. As we heard from Chris, it only really works if you do it across the whole catchment. So that's it. That's my best summary that I can do at the end of a long day. It's been fantastic. I'd like you to again show your reactions. It's one of the weird things about these conferences is you sort of speak into your computer screen. You never know if anyone's actually there. But if you could just give your reactions, we can't have rounds of applause. And if I could just add my thanks to all the speakers who've taken part, all of you for attending and for making it to the end. I can see lots of hands going up, so that's fantastic. Thank you. But above all, I want to thank our Becca, who does an amazing job with these conferences. I remember when we first started doing them online in COVID, and we've found our way. But I mean, I thought it ran really, really smoothly. Sorry, there were a few issues with sound for a few people. But Becca does so much work to get all the speakers together and organize all this. So thank you very much to her and the rest of the team working behind the scenes. And that's it. Thanks.